Welcome to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I'm KM Weiland, and I am here to take you deep with story theory, writing techniques, and the incredible wisdom of story. I believe story is the greatest power on this earth, and that as writers, we carry the torch of wielding that power with responsibility, passion, and skill. There's no such thing as just a story. Today, it is my honor and my purpose to help you write your best story, astound the world, and maybe change your life. Hello everyone, and welcome to this month's video. I'm KM Weiland. I run the writing website helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And today I want to talk about a very important topic, and that is learning how to trust yourself as an artist rather than relying too much on other people's advice. So this is a question that I receive in one form or another quite frequently from writers, particularly writers who are just starting out and are trying to find that balance of honoring their own creativity and their own creative instinct, and which probably is quite strong, or they wouldn't be interested in, creating art and writing stories, and balancing that against the need to learn and to understand the techniques and the tenets of the craft, as well as, the very common bit of advice, which is basically just seek advice, that you need to, seek resources that can help you understand writing. Now, I say often that writing a novel is an extremely complex art form. Really creating any type of story, whether it's a screenplay or whatever else, writing a story is a very complex art form. There are so many techniques and skills involved in this that you have to master if you're going to pull off the whole. Understanding story theory, understanding the shape of story, character arc, story structure, plot, that's part of it. But then you also have to learn how to execute those techniques, how to write good dialogue, how to write good prose, just spelling, punctuation, grammar is a foundation for all of this. And then just the little nuances of bringing characters to life, writing prose that's entertaining and interesting and makes sense to readers. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's just so many little skill sets that go to make up the big skill set of being able to write a successful novel or a successful screenplay or something else. So there is a lot to learn. And I think when you first start out, when you get into writing and you have a story idea, maybe you've been writing stories in one way or another for quite a while, as I was before I started getting serious and started realizing there's stuff to learn here. You don't just do it instinctively. There's actually technique and people who can guide you and help you figure out all this stuff that you've been struggling with and that seems really hard, and help you understand why doesn't my prose or my story look quite like the ones that I'm reading that I want it to look like. So the information is out there and it's fabulous. I clearly remember the first day I don't know how old I was, late teens probably. And I was just, rambling around the library and I found the writing section. And there were actual books that taught you how to write fiction. And it was just a revelation to me. And I just gobbled it up and it was so exciting. But I think from there, it can be really easy to get into a place where you just feel overwhelmed by all the information because, again, complex skill set, there's just so much to learn. And it can be very easy to feel like, your brain's going to explode in a not good way because there's just so much information to take in and integrate just so you can write a chapter in your story, right? So there has to be a balance between being willing to learn, being able to recognize your own ignorance and that there's stuff to learn and that there are people out there who can help you learn it, versus feeling so overwhelmed by having to take in all the information or having to follow somebody else's rules that you end up feeling like you've lost touch with your inner artist, kind of with your own inner compass of, how to write stories, your own inner story knowledge. Now, I always say, as I talk about in many different aspects of what I teach and what I talk about, is that story really, what is story? Story is just a reflection back to us of specifically of our arcs of psychological transformation and the rest of real life as well. It's just a mirror of life. So inherently, story is something that every human has an innate understanding of, right? Nobody has to tell you what a story is. You know, deep in your heart and your gut, you know what a story is. And particularly if you're drawn to writing a story, number one, you're probably deeply immersed in fiction yourself. You watch movies, you read books, and you've, just learned by osmosis what that looks like on a more intricate level. So you come to it with an innate knowledge. And it's important to recognize that. I always tell people, trust your writing gut, right? When you're writing something and it feels really good or it doesn't feel good, trust that. You may not understand what it's telling you specifically, but there's a truth in what you're experiencing in that. And it's important as you're going through maybe that early process of learning lots of stuff and learning from other people and kind of hearing their voice in your head, whether it's mine or some other writing instructor or whatever, or your peers, as you're trading critiques or engaging with beta readers, to not get lost in the voices that you're hearing to the point that you forget your own, right? Your own innate and very accurate sense of story. Now, again, this is not to say that, this innate gut knowledge and instinct of what is story and what makes a good story translates into the ability to do it, right? It doesn't always translate into the mental realm. We have to gain a certain consciousness around what our instincts are telling us so that we can bring mastery to the techniques. I particularly think really one of the most important things to help in finding your balance in a situation like this, or anything really, is understanding where you are in the context, right? Context, if you understand the big picture and the more information you gain on that, then the better you can understand where you're at, and therefore what questions you're actually facing and what answers you need to be able to execute your story in the way that you want. And one of the models that I particularly have found helpful in my own life is, I think this originated as an Arabic proverb, but it's the 4 stages of growth. And it's where you start out not knowing that you don't know. And then as you progress through this, state of complete ignorance, basically where you think you know when really you do know nothing. You progress from the state of not knowing that you don't know to knowing that you don't know, which is arguably the most powerful place to be. Because from here, you can move into this place of curiosity and learning and just, gathering information that's extremely helpful. And then you can move on to knowing that you know. Or rather, sorry, I messed that up. You move on to not knowing that you know. So you've gained enough information and context that you have shortened the gap, right, between your gut knowledge instinct and your mental knowledge, so that they're both aligned and they actually are pulling in sync. But you still haven't quite gained an awareness around that fact. And then from there, you move on to mastery, which is knowing that you know, right? So if you can kind of identify where you are within those 4 stages, that can give you an understanding of how much reliance you can give to your own understanding of any topic versus how much information you still need to glean and learn and grow before you can reach a place, again, where you've shortened that gap between your own gut instinct and your ability to kind of put words to and comprehend and bring a mental knowledge to that gut understanding. So I think that's a very helpful place to start. Another thing to think about is something that gets writers hung up sometimes is this kind of dichotomy between ignorance and perfectionism. And it really isn't a dichotomy because very often they actually are like the flip side of each other. I think a lot of the drive for perfectionism that we see, particularly in writers, because it's very much a topic that writers discuss because many of us do struggle with it. But I have found in my own life that really perfectionism and just the harshness and the toxicity sometimes of that inner critic is really rooted in ignorance. It's rooted in either not knowing or knowing but not knowing that you're knowing, right? And so it's an uncertainty. It's like, I'm not getting it right. I'm not, I don't know what's good enough. And therefore, it's never good enough kind of a thing. So sometimes, if you're, stuck in that place of perfectionism, and therefore there is a sense of like, I have to like learn and learn and learn. I have to get all the rules right. I have to, learn everything perfectly. And there can be kind of an abandonment of your own gut instinct in that process in replacing it with that toxic inner critic of perfectionism. And just kind of taking a step back and recognizing that perhaps that is in fact arising from a place of ignorance. And that's not a bad thing, right? It just allows you to move into that stage of knowing that you don't know. And that lets you know exactly where you're at. There's nothing wrong with that stage. As I say, in some ways, that's the most powerful and exciting stage where you're discovering everything. It's a place of discovery, right? So kind of flipping the script there, and instead of it feeling like this pressure of like, I have to learn everything, I have to, pay attention to what all the experts say and make sure I get everything perfectly right. And not moving, not flipping it into that space where it's like, well, phooey on them. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do because I know better than them anyway. What do they know? That kind of thing. Instead of, because that in itself isn't usually any more helpful than the perfectionism. But instead taking that step back and recognizing this is just a signal that I don't know something, and that it's a stage of not just learning more rules, more mental stuff, but trying to figure out how to shorten that gap between your own gut instinct and what you know, right? So if that need to know is arising out of a sense of, there's some things not working in my story, I'm not able to execute something the way I want to, then that lets you start working on better and better questions to ask that'll help you find the answers you need, instead of it just being this shotgun approach where you need to know everything, right? So that is something to think about, is just like, is if you feel like you're just pressured to follow the advice or to learn the advice of everybody else who's out there who, knows more than you do, then just try to narrow that down into a place where you are, just recognizing yourself as a student and not as someone who's less than or is failing because they don't know everything. But someone who has the opportunity now to find, to figure out within yourself and to use your gut instinct to narrow down, what do I need to know? And I think part and parcel of this is also kind of this idea of curiosity versus judgment, right? A lot of writers I hear from who are anxious about either, I need more advice, I need somebody to tell me how to do everything there is about my story, or like, I don't want anybody's advice. Like it's too much. I don't want or need anybody to tell me, what to do with my story. That there, in both of those scenarios, there's kind of this energy of just feeling judged, right? Like, and ultimately it's not really that anybody else is judging or going to judge your writing, it's that you're judging it and judging yourself. And again, it can be that perfectionistic, toxic inner critic. And so moving from being able to take a step back from this place of judgment, because art does not thrive under judgment, really, particularly the creative act. It's not a place that enhances or allows for curiosity. And curiosity, not only is that the best place from which to create art, it's also the best place from which to learn, right? Where it doesn't feel like, there's a teacher standing over you, beating over the head with a big book. But it's exciting, I mean, most of us, are readers. We love to learn. We love to learn all of this and get to experience new things and gain new skills. And so moving into that beginner's mind, kind of where you are not so much feeling like this is a test I have to ace, I have to cram for this test and ace it, and just realizing like it's a lifelong process, right? I mean, we're all still learning. The very fact that story mirrors life means like it's a never-ending school. We will always be learning more, we'll always be experimenting, we'll always be refining. And that's where the best art comes from, is that place where we don't know quite, right? Where we're following that true instinct within ourselves of creativity, but we don't know where it's going to go. Like we're open and we're flexible to what might come. We're in a place of curiosity. And I think that's the best way to approach any writing advice, whether you're watching my videos or reading my books or my website or my podcast or somebody else's, or you're getting feedback from critique partners, wherever you're receiving advice or looking for advice, the best mindset with which to engage with that is from a place of curiosity. Because again, I mean, just because somebody's out there telling you how to write a story doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about. And it certainly doesn't mean that even if they're right in some contexts, that they're right in all contexts, because art is extremely varied. And again, you may be creating something, that's never been created before, and they can't necessarily comment on that. Now, that isn't to say that, obviously there's also the other side of that where artists think that they're creating something massive and original and really it's just a mess. So again, it's that balance kind of humility and curiosity, of recognizing maybe where you are within the stages of growth, what you don't know, and therefore what you need to know, but approaching what you don't know with curiosity, and approaching people and advice and teachers with curiosity. What do they have to teach me? Rather than being in kind of this submissive mindset of like, they have all the answers and I need them, which, can either, like I say, put you in kind of this submissive place of wanting them to tell you what to do, or this kind of, the flip side of that, which is like, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do, therefore I don't want any advice, kind of a thing, which also ultimately isn't helpful. So again, I think context is extremely valuable in understanding, what you need to know, why you want to know it, what you're going to do with it. And the only way to gain context really is to, go out and gather lots of information, right? Context is like the broad field, the map. And then you get the little point that says you are here, right? If this is your context and it says you are here, you don't really know where you're at, right? But the bigger your map and the bigger your context, the more sense it makes when it says you are here. So the only way to gain that, is to explore, is to go on these discovery trips, and to learn all you can. And there is a period, again, it's ongoing to some degree, but particularly in the beginning where, maybe you don't know anything and you're just reading everything you can, watching everything you can, whether that's, videos like this that are from people who have advice to offer, or it's from, fellow writers who are offering you specific critiques, or it's just really immersing yourself in the art form, in novels, in movies, and studying, what they're doing, what's working, why does this work? And particularly, what has honestly been the single most helpful thing for me in my journey of discovery has been studying books and movies and paying attention to my own reactions. What is my gut reaction to whatever I'm experiencing in this story, whether it's good or whether it's bad, and why? Why did this work so well? Why did I think this was such an amazing story? Why did this affect me so deeply? Or why did this make me so mad, right? Why did this totally not work for me? And, really getting, paying attention to that and fine-tuning that not only helps you learn story by osmosis, and not only helps you shorten that gap between your gut instinct, your gut knowing, and your head, your mental knowledge. It's a way to really learn to trust your own instincts and to hone your own instincts, so that at a certain point, you're not as dependent on other people telling you stuff in order to broaden your context, right? You're able to create your own little cosmology of story, basically, right? Where you understand, you can say, oh yeah, that was that technique from that story, and I learned why that did or didn't work. And then, of course, there's the practice, right? You start putting it into practice in your own stories, writing it, which is a whole nother ballgame. You think you understand something, and then you try to execute it within your own stories, and you realize there's so many more layers to it. And doing that and bringing the experiential aspect into it is the quickest, well, I won't say the quickest, because again, it is a process, but it is the most efficient and the most effective way of really getting to a place where you do know and you do understand, and therefore you can trust your own advice. And more than that, then when you go out and you're encountering information or advice from other people, you can also trust your reaction to that. You can look at that and say, well, that doesn't resonate with me, so I'm going to reject that. And trust yourself to do that. Like, I am trustworthy. I have the authority to be able to say, no, that's not what I want to do with my art. And vice versa. Like, wow, that's great. That is such an insight. Like, I had never seen it that way. And claiming that. And in a way that becomes yours, right? It's not their insight anymore. When you have that reaction to something, that's something that I do a lot in my teaching is I don't teach something unless what I call it's from the inside out. The information comes in, but it has to be metabolized. It has to be digested until it's your own, right? You have your own understanding of it. And when you do that, going to say it was Socrates who said something along the lines of, when you have that feeling and you experience that insight, it's not like you're learning something new. That's not what it feels like. It feels like you're remembering something you always knew. It's just that flash of recognition almost of just like, yes, this is true. This makes sense. And that's what you're looking for. Because when you can experience that, particularly in a physical reaction within your body, then you know that it's yours, right? You can trust that. That is the essence of your gut instinct responding to something. So I think there's so much to this, as there always is. But I think foundationally, I just want to say that it's really important for artists to trust themselves. It's equally important to be humble, to be curious, to, read widely, to study, to be willing to be a student before you can be a master, right? And however long that may take. I mean, for some of us, that's a lifetime's journey, right? We may never get there. But again, as is often said, it's, and I think this is really true about art, that it's more about the journey than the destination. Kind of related to this, I really like Anne Lamott's quote where she says, being published isn't all it's cracked up to be, but writing is. And I think that that's pointing to the same thing of reaching some endpoint where you know everything or you've written the perfect book. It's there and it's done. It's great, fine. But what's really valuable and interesting is the journey to get there. And that journey is ongoing, because as soon as you reach a mountain peak and you think you know everything, you realize oh, wow, there's a whole mountain range out there that's still to explore. And so just kind of keeping that context in view, right? That big picture and that long range view of there will never be an end to learning. There will always be more to learn. But the more you can consolidate yourself and shorten that gap between your mental acuity and your gut knowing, then you become an accurate guide for yourself on that journey. And that's really all we're looking for, right? Is that groundedness of knowing we can trust ourselves and our own responses to whatever information that we learn. Because, we're the guide that goes with ourselves no matter what. And ultimately the one who has to make all the decisions. So we want to be able to trust our choices when we are creating our stories and our art. So that's just some thoughts on a topic that comes up in one way or another quite a bit in emails that I receive from people. So I hope those thoughts were helpful. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Helping Writers Become Authors. I hope you'll stop by the site for a full transcript of this episode and to join in the conversation in the comments. Tune in for next week's episode, where we'll continue to explore all things writing and storytelling. If you'd like to support the podcast, it always means a ton when you take a moment to leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or Spotify. To stay updated on all the latest content I create for you, the best way is to join my mailing list at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com/mailing list. You'll also immediately gain access to lots of free resources, including my books, Crafting Unforgettable Characters and 5 Secrets of Story Structure. For real-time connection with me, more writing advice, and behind-the-scenes glimpses, follow me on Instagram at authorkmwyland. A heartfelt thank you to each one of you for your support and enthusiasm, and especially those of you who support my work on patreon.com/kmwyland. You help make my site, this podcast, and so many other resources available to writers everywhere. So until next week, keep writing, keep dreaming, and most importantly, keep being true to your stories. Thank you for being part of helping writers become authors.